I had been looking forward to this camping trip with my best friend Alex for months. We both needed a break from the city, and the idea of a remote area with mountains, a lake, and a forest sounded like the perfect escape. We had never been to this particular area before, but we were excited to explore the unfamiliar terrain. As we arrived at our destination, the beauty of the landscape took our breath away. Majestic mountains with snow-capped peaks loomed in the distance, creating an awe-inspiring backdrop. The dense, lush forest that surrounded us. The thick canopy of trees filtered the sunlight, casting a gentle green glow on the forest floor. Wildflowers and ferns sprouted between the gnarled roots of ancient trees, and the air was alive with the sound of birdsong and the rustling of leaves. We followed a narrow, winding dirt path that led us to the lake. Its surface shimmered under the sun, reflecting the blue sky and the white, fluffy clouds overhead. The water was crystal clear, and we could see the smooth, rounded stones that lined the lake bed. The lake was nestled in a valley, and as we stood there, we felt embraced by the protective arms of the mountains that rose on either side. After taking in the scenery, we set out to find the perfect spot for our campsite. We wanted a place that was close enough to the lake for easy access to water and fishing, but also far enough from the shoreline to ensure we wouldn't be disturbed by any curious wildlife. Tucked away among the trees, the ground was soft and covered with a layer of fallen leaves, making it an ideal surface for setting of our tent. The trees around the clearing provided ample shade, shielding us from the harsh sun during the day. Nearby, a babbling brook cut through the landscape, its crystal clear water bubbling over smooth rocks, adding a gentle soundtrack to our serene surroundings. We pitched our tent, carefully securing the lines to ensure it would remain stable throughout our stay. Once it was set out, we built a fire pit a safe distance away, using rocks we collected from the lake's edge to create a barrier to contain the flames. We gathered firewood and kindling from the forest, taking care not to disturb the delicate ecosystem. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow on the mountains and bathing the lake in a warm, inviting light, we sat down near the fire, ready to enjoy our first night in this remote, beautiful place. The tranquility of the landscape was a balm to our weary souls, and we couldn't wait to explore and familiarize ourselves with this new uncharted territory. The first day of our camping trip began with the sun gently waking us as it filtered through the trees. We crawled out of our tent, embracing the cool morning air and the fresh smell of the forest. Excited for our first day, we prepared a hearty breakfast of scrambled eggs and bacon cooked over the campfire, accompanied by strong hot coffee. After breakfast, we grabbed our fishing gear and headed down to the lake. The water was so clear we could see the fish swimming beneath the surface, and we eagerly cast our lines. As we waited for a bite, we enjoyed the peaceful atmosphere, sharing stories and laughter. The hours seemed to fly by, and by the time we decided to head back to camp, we had caught several good-sized fish for our dinner. Once back at the campsite, we prepared the fish, marinating them with a blend of spices we had brought along. As evening approached, we started a campfire, and the aroma of the grilling fish mingled with the scent of burning wood. We feasted on our catch, reveling in our self-sufficiency and delicious flavors of the meal. After dinner, we sat by the fire, the night sky overhead speckled with countless stars. We talked and reminisced, the warmth of the fire and the camaraderie making us feel completely at ease in our remote haven. The second day dawned, and we eagerly planned a hike through the forest. After a quick breakfast of granola bars and fruit, we fill our backpacks with essentials like water, snacks, and a first aid kit. We ventured onto a well-trodden path that led us deeper into the woods, the sounds of birdsong and rustling leaves accompanying our journey. As we hiked, we marveled at the variety of plant life, the vibrant shades of green surrounding us. We encountered a small meandering stream, its water crystal clear and bubbling gently over smooth rocks. We followed the string for a while, stopping to rest and enjoy the soothing sound of the water. Further along, we discovered a grove of ancient trees, their massive trunks covered in thick, gnarled bark. The air felt heavy with history as we stood in the quiet clearing, imagining the centuries these trees had witnessed. By late afternoon, we returned to our campsite, tired but satisfied with our day of exploration. We decided on a simple dinner of canned chili heated over the fire, followed by gooey s'mores for dessert. As night fell, we listened to the sounds of the forest around us, feeling grateful for the experiences we had shared during our first 2 days in this remote and beautiful place. On the third day of our camping trip, we awoke to the sound of birdsong and a gentle breeze rustling the leaves of the trees around us. After our breakfast of pancakes cooked over the campfire, we decided to explore a different part of the forest, hoping to discover more of the natural beauty this remote area had to offer. We filled our backpacks with essentials and set off along a lesser-known trail, the path less defined than the ones we had followed before. The forest grew denser as we ventured deeper, the sunlight filtering through the canopy at narrow beams, casting a mosaic of light and shadow on the forest floor. The air was filled with the scents of moss and damp earth, and the occasional flash of color caught our eye as a butterfly or bird flitted through the underbrush. As we hiked, we chatted and marveled at the scenery until we stumbled upon a small, mysterious clearing. The clearing was ringed with wildflowers, and the grass seemed greener and more vibrant than in the surrounding forest. There was an almost magnetic allure to the place, and Alex was particularly drawn to it, curiosity sparkling in his eyes. "Hey, I'm going to check that out." "I'll be right back," Alex said, stepping off the trail and heading toward the clearing. I watched him go, feeling a bit uneasy but unable to pinpoint why. I decided to wait near the trail, figuring he wouldn't be gone long. I took a seat on a fallen log, taking in the sounds and smells of the forest while I waited for Alex to return. Minutes turned into hours and I began to worry. I called out Alex's name, my voice echoing through the trees, but there was no response. Deciding that I couldn't wait any longer, I hesitantly ventured into the clearing, my heart pounding in my chest as I searched for any sign of my friend. The clearing seemed even more peculiar up close, but there was no trace of Alex. I spent hours combing the surrounding woods, calling his name and looking for any clue that might lead me to him. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, I realized I had no choice but to return to the campsite, hoping against hope that Alex had somehow found his way back there. With a heavy heart, I retraced my steps, following the trail back to our campsite. As I approached the clearing, I spotted a familiar figure sitting by the fire, staring into the flames. Relief washed over me, and I hurried to his side. "Where have you been?" I asked, my voice a mix of relief and frustration. "I've been searching for you for hours. I've just got a little lost," Alex replied, his eyes not meeting mine. "I'm sorry." Though I was relieved to have found my friend, I couldn't shake that uneasy feeling that had been growing since our separation. As the days went on, I started to notice small changes in Alex that made me question if the person who returned from the clearing was truly my friend. Initially, these changes were subtle, easy to dismiss as the result of fatigue or the stress of getting lost in the forest. The first odd behavior I noticed was Alex's sudden disinterest in our usual conversations. Before we'd talk for hours about anything and everything, but now he seemed distant and disengaged. His responses were brief, and he would often stare off into the distance as if lost in thought. Next, I observed that Alex had developed an unusual fascination with the wildlife in the area. He would spend hours watching the birds and squirrels, his gaze following their every movement with an intensity I had never seen from him before. It was as if he was studying them, trying to understand their behavior. His appetite had also changed dramatically. Alex, who had always been an adventurous eater, now seemed to have an aversion to the food we had brought with us. He would pick at his meals, eating just enough to sustain himself, but never truly enjoying the food. Perhaps the most unsettling change was his newfound ability to navigate the forest with uncanny ease. Alex would have been directionally challenged for as long as I'd known him, now seemed to have an innate understanding of the area. He would venture off into the woods alone, always returning to the campsite without any difficulty. This was especially unnerving, considering how easily he had become lost just a few days earlier. Finally, I noticed that his sleeping habits had become erratic. He would lie awake in the tent, staring at the roof as if he were waiting for something. Other nights he would slip out of the tent and disappear into the woods, only to return just before dawn, looking no worse for wear. All of these strange behaviors combined made me increasingly uneasy. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had happened to Alex in that mysterious clearing, and that the person who had returned to our campsite was not the same person who had entered the woods that day. As our camping trip drew to a close and we prepared to return to civilization, I began to dread what might happen once we left this remote and enigmatic place. The car ride back home from the camping trip was a long and silent journey, filled with tension and unease. As we drove away from the remote wilderness, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread, wondering what had truly happened to Alex during our trip. The first clue that something was seriously amiss came when we passed through a small town along the way. We stopped at a diner for lunch, and as we sat down to eat, I noticed Alex's reaction to the other people in the restaurant. He seemed almost startled by their presence, as if he had forgotten what it was like to be around other humans. His behavior grew increasingly odd as we continued our journey. He would stare out the window for long stretches of time, seemingly mesmerized by the passing scenery. At one point, I noticed him absent-mindedly running his fingers over the dashboard, as if he were unfamiliar with the materials and textures of the car. The most alarming incident occurred when we stopped at a gas station to refuel. I went inside to pay and grab some snacks, leaving Alex in the car. When I returned, I found him standing outside the vehicle, staring intently at a stray cat that had wandered near. As I approached, I noticed that Alex seemed to be communicating with the cat in some way. He was making strange, soft noises that I had never heard before, and the cat appeared to be responding, its tail flicking in ears, twitching in a peculiar manner. The scene was both fascinating and deeply unsettling. As we resumed our drive, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I racked my brain, searching for any explanation for Alex's strange behavior, but nothing made sense. It was as if the person sitting beside me in the car was a complete stranger wearing the face of my best friend. I couldn't take it anymore, and I finally asked, "Alex, are you okay? You've been acting strange since you disappeared in the woods." He turned to me, his eyes cold and emotionless. "I'm fine," he replied, his voice devoid of warmth. But as he spoke, I noticed something in the rearview mirror. The reflection that should have been my friend's was twisted and distorted like a warped version of him. My heart raced as the realization hit me. Whatever was sitting next to me, whoever had come back from the forest that day, was now my friend. It looked and sounded like Alex, but it was something else entirely. My grip tightened on the steering wheel as I tried to decide what to do next. Fear coursing through my veins, and the long road home stretched out before me, filled with fear. Story 2. As the 5 friends continued their road trip, they couldn't help but feel invigorated by the freedom of the open road. Ella, a history buff with a penchant for adventure, eagerly shared stories about the forgotten towns and settlements scattered across the country. Max, the group's free-spirited artist, would often sketch the picturesque landscapes they passed through, while Sarah, the practical and resourceful one, made sure they stayed on track with their itinerary. Jake, the inquisitive engineer, and Chris, the charismatic and kind-hearted musician, provided the group with endless entertainment through their amusing debates about the latest technology and music trends. Each friend brought something unique to the journey, and their camaraderie only grew stronger as they traveled together. One day, as they were passing through a particularly desolate stretch of highway, they noticed their gas gauge nearing empty. Concerned, they began searching for the nearest gas station. As the sun began to set, casting an orange glow over the horizon, they spotted a faded sign pointing to a town called Hollow Grove. It seemed like the perfect opportunity to refuel and find a place to rest for the night. The road to Hollow Grove was narrow and winding, surrounded by dense, ancient trees that seemed to close in on them as they drove further. The atmosphere was unnerving, and the friends couldn't shake the feeling that they were being drawn into something otherworldly. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the trees, a thick fog rolled in, making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. Despite their unease, the group pressed on, guided only by the dim glow of their headlights. They felt a growing sense of disorientation as the road seemed to stretch on endlessly, with no sign of the town. Their nerves were frayed, and the air in the car grew heavy with tension. At last, they spotted the decrepit welcome sign for Hollow Grove, nearly obscured by the encroaching forest. As they entered the town, they couldn't help but feel a cold shiver run down their spines. The town appeared to be entirely abandoned, its once propped buildings reduced to crumbling shells. The streets were empty and lifeless, and the only sound that pierced the silence was the distant howl of the wind. As the friends approached Hollow Grove, the forest seemed to close in around them, creating an oppressive atmosphere that weighed heavily on their spirits. The once vibrant colors of the surrounding flora appeared muted, as though the very life had been drained from the landscape. The trees loomed over the road, their gnarled branches casting eerie, twisted shadows that danced in the waning light. As they drew closer, they began to notice the gradual decay that had taken hold of the town. The first signs of abandonment appeared in the form of dilapidated houses on the outskirts. These once charming homes now stood desolate with broken windows, peeling paint, and overgrown yards that hinted at years of neglect. The group's unease grew, but they pressed on, driven by their urgent need for fuel and shelter. Upon entering the town, they found the main street lined with crumbling abandoned buildings. The remnants of a once thriving community could be seen in the boarded-up storefronts, the rusted lampposts, and the weathered side of the town's forward diner. A thick layer of dust and grime seemed to cover every surface, and the air was heavy with a scent of decay and dampness. Despite the eerie silence that enveloped the town, the friends couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The wind whispered through the trees and rustled the leaves, creating an unsettling soundtrack to their exploration. The friends continued through the deserted town, passing the lifeless remains of Paula Grove's church, schoolhouse, and post office. Nature had begun to reclaim the town, with ivy snaking its way up the walls of the buildings and tall grass encroaching on the cracked and buckled pavement. As they reached the edge of town, it discovered an old motel, its crumbling sign barely visible through the overgrown foliage. The building itself appeared relatively intact, though the years of abandonment had left it in a state of disrepair. The once vibrant paint had faded to a dull, chipped gray, and the windows were dark and empty like the eyes of a long-dead creature. As the friends approached the abandoned motel, they hesitated, exchanging uneasy glances. The building seemed to emanate a cold, unwelcoming aura, but they knew they had little choice but to seek shelter for the night. Gathering their courage, they stepped out of their car and slowly made their way towards the motel's entrance. The once glass door of the lobby had long since shattered, leaving a gaping hole through which they could peer into the dark interior. Ella pulled out a flashlight and cautiously lit the group inside. The lobby was covered in a thick layer of dust, and the musty smell of mildew filled the air. Cobwebs stretched across the corners of the room, and the remnants of once vibrant wallpaper clung stubbornly to the walls. Max took a few steps forward and noticed a rusty key rack behind the reception desk. Remarkably, several keys still hung in their designated spots, as if waiting for long-forgotten guests. Sarah suggested they each take a key, hoping that the rooms would provide at least some semblance of comfort in this eerie place. As they ventured down the dimly lit hallway, the floorboards creaked and groaned beneath their footsteps, adding to the unsettling atmosphere. Jake noticed that each door they passed for the scars of time, with chipped paint and warped frames. Chris quietly strummed his guitar, attempting to lighten the mood, but the notes seemed to be swallowed by the oppressive silence. Upon reaching their designated rooms, the friends hesitantly unlocked the doors and stepped inside. The rooms were surprisingly intact, though the passage of time had left its mark. The once soft carpets were now matted and faded, and the paint on the walls had started to peel away in large, uneven strips. The furniture was coated in dust and cobwebs. But the beds still held their shape, offering a place to rest their weary heads. As they began to unpack their belongings, Sarah discovered an old newspaper hidden beneath the tattered curtains. The headline read, "Entire town of Hollow Grove vanishes overnight." The friends exchanged nervous glances, sensing that they had stumbled upon a chilling mystery that was connected to the ghostly figures they had seen roaming the town. Throughout the night, the friends took turns keeping watch, unable to shake the feeling that something was watching them from the shadows. As they continued their exploration of Hollow Grove the next day, they would come to learn the true extent of the town's tragic past and the supernatural forces that held its former residents captive in an eternal loop. As night fell over the abandoned motel, an unsettling atmosphere settled in, filling the friends with a growing sense of unease. They agreed to take turns keeping watch while the other tried to sleep, knowing that they couldn't let their guard down in this eerie place. Ella volunteered to take the first wash. As the others settled into their rooms, she positioned herself in the dimly lit hallway, her eyes scanning the darkness for any signs of movement. The wind outside howled, sending shivers down her spine as it rattled the windows and doors. As the night progressed, Ella began to hear faint, unexplained sounds. At first, she dismissed them as the creaks and groans of the old building, but soon the whispers became more distinct. She could almost make out words, as if someone were speaking just beyond her range of hearing. When her shift ended, Ella awoke Max and shared her concerns about the whispers. Max, a skeptic by nature, assured her that it was likely just the wind playing tricks on her mind. As she reluctantly went to her room to rest, Max took up the watch, armed with his sketchbook to pass the time. As the night wore on, Max found himself growing more anxious. He too began to hear the whispers Ella had mentioned, but he was too proud to admit it. Instead, he focused on sketching the dark, shadowy corners of the motel, capturing the eerie atmosphere that surrounded them. By the time Sarah's turn came, the whispers had grown louder, and she could now make out the ghostly voices of the town's former residents. They spoke of their lives, their dreams, and their regrets, trapped in an endless cycle of despair. Sarah's fear intensified when she noticed faint, spectral figures moving outside the motel's windows. She could see the outlines of Apollo Grove's trapped souls wandering the streets in a perpetual loop, their faces etched with sorrow and longing. As Jake and Chris took their turns keeping watch, they too experienced the whispers and ghostly apparitions. The friends realized that they were not alone in the motel, and that the spirits of Apollo Grove's lost residents were haunting its halls. The first light of dawn filtered through the motel's dusty windows. The friends gathered in the lobby, their sleepless night etched on their weary faces. They knew they had to act quickly to uncover the truth about Hollow Grove before they too became trapped in its supernatural grasp. Ella, the history buff, suggested they start by searching the town's library for any records or documents that might shed light on the town's past. The group agreed and set out, navigating the eerily quiet streets toward the cities. Upon entering the library, they found it to be in a state of disarray. Books and newspapers lay scattered across the floor, and the air was thick with the scent of old paper and mildew. Max and Chris began searching the shelves for any books on local history, while Jake and Sarah sifted through the piles of newspapers, hoping to find clues in old headlines and articles. Ella, meanwhile, discovered a hidden door that led to a small, dusty room filled with old maps, town records, and handwritten journals. As the friends regrouped in the hidden room, they began to piece together the tragic history of Hollow Grove. They fought accounts of the meteor crash that occurred decades ago, and the strange energy it emitted warping time and space. The journals spoke of townspeople who vanished without a trace, leaving their families to mourn their inexplicable loss. As they continued their research, they learned about an ancient ritual that was believed to have the power to break the supernatural loop that held the town captive. The ritual required specific items and incantations, and it had to be performed at the site of the meteor crash. With time running out, the friends decided to split up to gather the necessary items for the ritual. Ella and Max scoured the library for books on the occult and supernatural, searching for the incantations they would need. Sarah and Chris ventured into the nearby forest to collect herbs and plants, while Jake set to work constructing a makeshift altar at the meteor crash site. Throughout the day, the friends worked tirelessly, driven by the knowledge that the spirits of Apollo Grove's lost residents were depending on them. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they regrew to the meteor crash site, armed with the knowledge and tools they needed to perform the ritual. They began the ritual. The ghostly figures they had seen the night before began to gather around them, their faces filled with a mix of hope and fear. The friends knew that their actions could be the key to freeing the trapped souls and breaking the curse that had gripped Hollow Grove for so long. With determination in their hearts, they continued their efforts, knowing that the fate of the town and its lost residents rested in their hands. As the friends stood in a circle around the makeshift altar at the meteor crash site, they felt a palpable energy in the air, their nerves tingling with anticipation. They had each been tasked with a specific role in the ancient ritual, and they knew they had to work together to break the loop that had ensnared Hollow Grove. Ella began by reciting the incantation she had found in the library's hidden room. Her voice wavered at first, but she soon found her strength, her words rising confidently above the wind that whipped around them. The ghostly figures of Hollow Grove's lost residents drew closer, their eyes fixed on the friends as they carried out the ritual. Max carefully arranged the herbs and plants Sarah and Chris had collected in the forest, placing them in a specific pattern that formed a protective barrier around the group. As he lit the herbs, a fragrant smoke began to rise, filling the air with an otherworldly scent that seemed to calm and power the friends. Jake had constructed a makeshift altar using stones from the surrounding area, carefully inscribing symbols he had found in the ancient texts. As the ritual progressed, the symbols began to glow with a soft ethereal light, pulsating in rhythm with Ella's incantations. Sarah and Chris, meanwhile, played a haunting melody on their instruments. The music seemed to resonate with the spirits, creating a powerful connection between the living and the dead. As the melody intertwined with Ella's incantations, the energy at the site intensified, causing the very air to shimmer and vibrate. As the ritual reached its climax, a brilliant flash of light erupted from the center of the circle, momentarily blinding the friends. The meteor itself seemed to resonate with their actions, its unearthly energy surging and pulsing in response to the ritual. The ghostly figures of Hollow Grove's resonance were drawn towards the light, their forms beginning to shimmer and change. As they stepped into the brilliant glow, their once sorrowful expressions were replaced with relief and gratitude. One by one they disappeared into the light, their souls finally free from the loop that had held them captive. As the last of the spirits vanished, the light began to fade, leaving the friends standing in the now quiet clearing. They could feel a shift in the atmosphere, as though a heavy burden had been lifted from the town. Exhausted but triumphant, the friends knew that they had succeeded in breaking the curse that had plagued Hollowgrove for so long. With the knowledge that they had set the lost souls free, the friends returned to the motel to rest before continuing their journey. As they left Hollowgrove the following day, they couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and accomplishment, knowing that they had played a part in restoring balance and peace to the town at its resonance. The experience had bonded them in ways they could never have imagined, and they would carry the memory of Hollowgrove with them for the rest of their lives.